Okay, in this video I'm going to be showcasing the two summoner builds that I created, the Glacial Guardian and Summoner of Sparks. One of them is a water summoner and the other one is a fire summoner. They're both a bit different, and we'll go ahead and jump in here and show you how the Glacial Guardian works. So the first thing I do here outside of combat is cast Rain in order to summon my incarnate there, making him a water incarnate. Then I go ahead and buff him with power and farsight infusions to make him stronger and give him some abilities. And then I summon the elemental totem in order to make it a water totem. Now this is something you won't always be able to do outside of combat. Sometimes you'll be in scenarios where it's not possible, and it will shave a few turns off your incarnate's life, but I think it's well worth saving the 5 or 6 AP that you're going to use doing it in order to get that all done and be able to attack from turn 1. So as a Glacial Guardian, you always want to try and keep 3 water totems out in order to keep everything wet, in order to help facilitate freezing enemies. And in order to do that, you have to summon one every turn. So I go ahead and summon one here. Then I go ahead and buff with Venomous Aura, which is great because it increases the damage of the incarnate and the totems, and it will increase the damage of any new totem I summon or any other summons any of your party place out, and it will buff all your companions as well along the way. Then I go ahead and use Winter Blast in order to chill a couple of enemies and get them prepped for being frozen, and also strip some magic armor from the summoner. And then I use Ice Fan in order to freeze them all, and you'll notice it's an AoE, so I target in between all 3 targets so I can hit all 3 at once, making sure that I get them all, dealing as much damage as possible and freezing them. And lastly, I go ahead and use Encourage to increase the intelligence of my totems, bumping their damage, as well as my incarnate. So on my incarnate's turn, I go ahead and chuck a projectile at the summoner there to weaken him a bit, and I battering ram through. Battering ram isn't going to be as effective with this build because it knocks down if the person's physical armor is stripped, and we're not going for physical armor here. But it still does considerable damage, but you're primarily going to be using that ranged attack or whirlwind with this build in order to get as much damage from the incarnate as you can. The incarnate has a much less important role in this build than in the Summoner of Sparks. It's just there to kind of add more damage. The totems are really what you need in order to gain control of the battlefield. On this turn, I go ahead and start with Global Cooling, which chills the dogs, and you'll notice it freezes the summoner because it was set wet by the totem on the previous turn. So one of the great things about this build is that those totems keep enemies wet, making it so much easier to freeze them, which can be kind of a challenge if you're a Titleist type player or a player playing a fully Hydrosophist build. And this kind of eases that burden because it sets one of those status effects for you and also gives you something to do with your AP in between, cooldowns on your spells. So you notice right here that the dog becomes frozen from the totem, which is exactly what we're going for. The AI is actually smart enough with these totems that it will target enemies whose turns are coming up, that they can freeze. So as long as you can get the totems to go before these guys, it'll literally wipe out their turns. On my incarnate's turn there, I go ahead and whirlwind, killing the 2 dogs and getting the summoner just about down to dead, and then I just whack him once and finish him off. On this turn, I go ahead and use Hail Strike on the archer, freezing him. And then I go ahead and cast another totem because they only last 3 turns, so one is gonna die there. And then I just go ahead and buff my armor because I have no real way of attacking because I'm using a sword. If I had a wand, I could have attacked him with a wand. Then on my incarnate's turn, he just goes ahead and finishes him off with a ranged attack there, and that concludes that fight. So the real benefit of the Glacial Guardian build is that the totems help keep enemies wet and so that you can freeze them easier, which is great. They boost damage, team damage if you can keep 3 out at a time. And also what's really great about the Incarnate and the water totems, because they're water, they don't take any damage from your Hail Strike or your Ice Shards or whatever. If they're right next to an enemy, you can go ahead and just lay into them, and it doesn't deal any damage to them because they're immune to that damage, so that's really handy. I really recommend this build to parties that use other characters that use water, like a Frost Paladin or a Titleist or a Crystalline Cleric, because water synergizes really well with water, and you can just keep enemies frozen just like constantly with like at least 2 water-based characters. So if you want to play this build, try and have at least one other character that's water-based for best results. Okay, in this video we're going to showcase the Summoner of Sparks. This is on Tactician, just like the Glacial Guardian was. This isn't Lone Wolf. I'm not playing a Lone Wolf build, even though it looks like it because of 2 characters. I wasn't on the Glacial Guardian either. I wanted to show that these builds are very much viable on Tactician, so I didn't take Lone Wolf just to show you how viable that they are. Now, the Summoner of Sparks has a little bit different of a focus than the Glacial Guardian. The Glacial Guardian uses totems more effectively than the Incarnate, and the Summoner of Sparks doesn't really use totems at all. I mean, you could, but you don't really need them. You're going to be focusing on buffing your Incarnate to be super strong, and you and your Incarnate are just going to go to town using Master of Sparks to just wreck everything on the screen. Now, what I really like about this build is it takes more advantage of Master of Sparks because it's an AoE, so many characters can use it, because you and the Incarnate both have very good pyrokinetic, very good intelligence, make good use of it with Whirlwind and Battering Ram, or Bull Rush in your case. And the Sparks don't set any teammates on fire, so unlike a Battle Mage that may have some difficulty not hurting its teammates or a Storm Chaser, with this build, you know, you're not getting friendly fire, so you don't have to worry about harming other teammates, which is great because you can have other melee builds involved. So much like the Glacial Guardian, you can see I buffed outside of combat here. I just used Phoenix Dive in order to create a fiery surface. You can use any fire spell that creates a fire surface for this. Searing Daggers is a good choice early on because you can throw one right next to you or wherever you want to summon an Incarnate. But then I go ahead and buff it before combat. So when the fight triggers here, I go ahead and use Adrenaline to get 6 AP, and you'll notice right away I actually have less AP than I do on the Glacial Guardian, and that's because we're using Glass Cannon with Glacial Guardian in order to get more AP to cast spells and summon. I wouldn't recommend doing that on a Summoner of Sparks because the Glacial Guardian is CCing targets, so it doesn't have to worry about taking damage as much. But with the Summoner of Sparks, you know, you're not CCing anything, so you're going to get hit if you don't kill everything, so it's just kind of a bad idea. The first thing I do after that is use Ignition. This is to set all the enemies on fire, which reduces their fire resistance by 15%. Because we have Torture, it doesn't matter whether they have magic armor, which is great. And then I Bull Rush through. Again, with Torture, it sets bleeding on all the enemies, so it's great here. It works well with this. And then I Whirlwind, already killing 1 dog, and I'm already in good shape. I save 1 AP there for the next round, and go ahead and pass my turn. On my Incarnate's turn, I go ahead and Battering Ram in, triggering some sparks, and then I go ahead and use Whirlwind, which finishes off the other dog and gets one of the Magisters almost dead, and the Summoner is in pretty bad shape already, and this is just after 1 round of my team. So on my second turn, I Bull Rush, and that concludes the fight. You can see how powerful this build is. It's ridiculous. Me and my Incarnate alone, non-Lone Wolf, on Tactician, killed a group of enemies, and we did it in like 1.25 turns, 1.5 turns. It was really ridiculous. One of the things I didn't showcase here that you can do is you can actually use Supercharger on your Incarnate to give 100% increased damage, which you may wonder why after spending all that AP buffing it you might do, but I'm actually just going to go ahead and show you a quick clip here of why you might do it. So in this clip here, my Incarnate is Power Infused, Farsight Infused, Enraged, Supercharger, and Master of Sparks. You can see the devastating damage that I did there. Your Incarnate doesn't have Savage Sword Leash talent, so Enraged doesn't make his Sparks crit, unfortunately, but it will make his attacks. So you may or may not need to use that. It will increase your damage a little bit, but not as much as you'd like. But you can see it killed 3 targets in 1 turn, which, you know, is a little better than what I did in the other video clip there. But it's very situational, right? Like maybe, you know, you can kill a couple targets that are dangerous if you do it at the cost of your Incarnate, or maybe you don't need to. Maybe they're not that threatening, and it's better to have your fully buffed Incarnate for a few more turns. But maybe you have it for a few more turns and your Incarnate's about to die, then you want to supercharge it and just go ham with it. So, you know, it's always there, and it can deal incredible damage. So I hope you enjoyed the video. You can see the 2 Summoner builds are a little bit different. We have the Radiant Battle Mage build coming soon, along with the Tectonic Sage, so stay tuned for those.